Playas, how you darn? Welcome back to Playas Guide. On this episode of Playas Guide, we're going to take a trip down memory lane as I introduce you to my retrospective views on retro video game collecting. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. One small click from you makes a big difference to this channel and to the members of our community on Discord and Twitch for daily retro gaming content. If you're into watching streams, you can also find Playas Guide on Instagram and Twitter. But what you came here for is some of my memories, and maybe you could share some of yours in the comments below as to how video game collecting, and even more specifically retro video game collecting, has changed over the years. Now, the biggest and most noticeable difference is obviously going to be the price of games. Although we've seen things cool off just a little bit in the past month or two in 2020, whereas the past 2 or 3 years, things have just gone ape shit crazy. We didn't quite expect to see prices really skyrocket the way they did. And, you know, they do need to cool down a bit. Do I think they will go down to prices post-pandemic? Maybe, but I think that's the lowest we could possibly see them go. But looking back at the prices that I've seen in the past, I've seen video games where, you know, at the time, you could get a shoebox of NES games, which was somebody's collection from the 80s or 90s, even sub Super Nintendo sometimes, where people are just giving that stuff away, just throwing it away. And in that generation, too, a lot of times boxes were not saved. Now, I have some of the boxes for the games I bought brand new, which was only 2 NES games at the time, but I still have those boxes. I have them right here, in fact. There's actually, this one here still has a sticker on it from when I tried to sell my NES games. I tried to sell this CIB copy of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes for $8. So Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and Defenders of Dinosaur City, pretty uncommon games in my opinion. I really don't see them hardly ever, but these were games that I picked out as a kid to buy, as these were the brand new games I picked out. So Defenders of Dinosaur City, I was a big fan of the comic book series, and Attack of the Killer Tomatoes had a very short cartoon run. I had also rented the game and watched the original movie, and for whatever reason, as a child, whatever, I think I was like 6 or 7, I was interested in that. And I've also picked up in the back of the day many sealed games. Here's one that is still sealed. I never touched because I had no interest in it. But many of these I tore open. And this was during a time when video rental stores were liquidating their inventory. They were also usually a great place, many of these stores, to purchase brand new video games as well. So they would sell you new games, and then you could sell them back, and they would recycle them and sell them back to you as used games. Then they had their rentals. So they had, back in the 90s, video stores and renting video games was a big deal, as you probably already know. But when they liquidated this stuff, especially the NES, and even like you could say the Atari and SNES had some of this too, but most notably I think was the NES, where it would be 3 or 4 games for $10. They just have value bids full of these games, and that's what really got me started to collecting, because I had a small collection already, and as I mentioned, I tried to sell some of those games and couldn't, because there was a time in the late 90s where you couldn't even give away NES games. You could sell them. You couldn't even give them away. People would give you a box full of games. Actually, I had a shoebox full of games from my cousins, which I was playing during the N64 era and late SNES era. And that's really what kept me playing NES games. And then the fact that, you know, you could just get these games kind of anywhere in the late 90s and early 2000s for dirt cheap, I really liked, because I was a big fan of action platformers, side-scrollers, and just being able to go to the store and pick up old NES games and play them. They weren't that old at the time, maybe 10 years, but being able to play some of the classic games that I never got to own, like all the Ninja Gaidens and Zelda games, Final Fantasy. I didn't know what those were about as a child because I couldn't rent every game. How about all the Mega Man games? I could own all of those games brand new. Like I said, I only got 2 brand new games ever. And I still held on to those and the boxes because I valued them that much from my childhood. And these places were liquidating, getting rid of them. And then even over the years, let's go just into like 2008. So 2008 is when I began to have an online presence, and I found out about websites like Nintendo Age, Play the NES, and CGCC. I kind of lurked for about a year. Nintendo Age had an e-zine, which I was very interested because they had a price guide, which at that time, 2008, I was starting to realize, hey, I was around 400 NES games. I wanted to get them all. I didn't know what they all were, so I was making a list. I was on NES Guide. That website's still there. You could check out every NES game, and it's got gameplay of them. It used to have all the eBay listings, too, for each game, which I thought was fantastic, because if you saw a game you liked, you could then go and check it out. Well, back then, website forums were a big deal, but I couldn't really find any accurate price guides. I met this guy, not too far from where I lived, actually. I came across his Kijiji ad, and he had a bunch of loose games, and there was like 20 games on his list I needed, and the prices were very reasonable. And like I said, at this time I was starting to realize, hey, there are $20 NES games. They're like, a $20 NES game might have been something like a Fire and Ice, or I think Gemfire might have been around $20 at that time, and then maybe $30 for DuckTales 2 or Power Blade 2, something like that. So I was becoming more aware that, hey, there are some games that are harder to find, some rare games, or were considered rare, and I started to go after some of those, and that's where I decided to get an eBay to get some of the games that I really wanted that I couldn't find, like Bucky O'Hare, which was maybe like $18, $18 then. And just whatever, right? So everything was much more accessible, and available. And when I met this guy who introduced me to Nintendo Age and their e-zine, I did sign up right away until they stopped printing the e-zine. Then I signed up because I wanted to make a post on their forum saying, hey, what happened to this e-zine? I thought this thing was great. I actually didn't know how to change my username and post or do anything. I just knew how to download the e-zine, so I started a whole new account, and that sparked my interest on there and talking with other people, because I was like, hey, now I know there's other people out there collecting these games like me. Because prior to about 2009, I knew there was like people around buying the games, talking nostalgically about some of these games, but not actively hunting down games they didn't have and really collecting for them. I want to tell you about a deal too. The seller wanted, I think, $2,200 for their collection, which was close to 400 games, I want to say. It was about a 2-hour drive away. I found their listing on Kijiji. For those of you who don't know Kijiji, it's a lot like Craigslist, but much better. I believe it's owned by eBay. So the user interface is so much better than Craigslist. Nobody in Canada really uses Craigslist because Kijiji is so good. So I talked to this guy. I was in college at the time, so I talked to this guy who had a flea market booth who I always bought games off of. And by the way, I went to his house to buy games before. I actually established pretty good relationships with a lot of flea market people selling comics and different collectibles. And I'd go to their house and rummage through the stuff. This guy had, in his basement, he had so many NESs that his unfinished basement, he decided to make rooms by building walls out of NES consoles. And I think there might have been like kind of a flimsy Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Atari walls too, because they didn't stack obviously as nicely as NES. But that was a thing. Like, it was not hard to get these consoles. Anyways, the story here is that I wanted to combine forces with him because this guy wanted $2,200. We were trying to grind him down to $18. And I was going to kind of cherry pick the stuff I wanted, like the CIB Flintstone Surprise at Dinosaur Peak, the Little Samson Princess Tomato I wanted, Bubble Bobble Part 2 CIB I wanted. Anyways, he did go for 1,800. He wanted $2,000, and we decided, look, I was only going to pitch 6 or 7 because I was a college kid on a much tighter budget then, and he was willing to put in like about $1,000, maybe a little more. So that was pushing it. That was our top bid, and we didn't end up getting that. But could you imagine? I mean, really, I should be kicking myself now because, yeah, $2,200 is like, for him, he was a reseller. He would have wanted to flip that stuff within a month or two, so the value wouldn't have changed. But for me, holding on to that stuff, the value would certainly, like, I would be more than well compensated if I were to sell those games now. So we've looked at the prices and how they've changed and the availability. And, you know, back then there really wasn't a lot of competition. Now, so many people are established in their careers, and then some. There's many more YouTubers too now. I remember back then watching a lot of Screw Attack and anyone associated with Screw Attack. So Talking Classics, Angry Video Game Nerd, the Retro Hunters. I loved that show. And then Game Chasers came along later, did what they did, but these guys obviously had a little bit more experience working with video editing and had a little bit more flashier of a product, and with that there was like retro, where there was some good stuff being produced back in the day, and then before that, and people have really built on that. There are so many YouTube communities. I've jumped into the mix too because I feel that my nostalgia sort of supersedes many of the YouTubers of today and the longevity of my collecting experience, and that is what made me want to share that passion, those interests and experiences with you on this channel, and hopefully you get some knowledge from that you can benefit from yourself in your own collections and retro gaming experiences. That's what I hope to share with you. That's what got me into the mix, because I saw there wasn't really a lot of that kind of going on. There was definitely some veterans who've built themselves up and are still kicking and doing very well. Many of those from some of those broadcast companies from myself. And that's also inspired me to do Playas Guide, where we have different content over on Twitch that you can watch. And I try to do some different programs like retro gaming news and talk about some different new games and stuff coming out on here. But so as all of those things change, there's more YouTubers, more collectors. Yeah, prices are going to go up. And the other thing that has happened over the years is especially it's been like 15 years now, Nintendo's really taken notice. But over the 10 years, especially the past 10 years, retro gaming has very much gone mainstream. The collectability of these games has grabbed a lot of people's attention. There's a lot more people coming into the market because of that. And they're also being drawn in different directions. Different people are more interested in certain things like sealed games now. Where, as I mentioned before, 20 years ago, a sealed game, I'd pick it up for the same price or like a couple bucks more, if that, than maybe even $1 more sometimes than a used copy. CIB games, I got a whole bunch of them that I've held on to that I picked up for $1 a piece from the flea market. Now that was a good deal then, but it wasn't unheard of. And then just to take these games and give them to a friend who might have been interested in getting into playing some old games because you wanted to share that passion with someone, or tearing open a sealed game just so you could play it, and because you bought it so cheap, was something that was not uncommon or unfamiliar to me. It was something I did quite often because the abundance was there. Now you would never do anything like that. Some of you guys are cringing, and I am too a little bit, at the fact that I did do those sort of things. But I mean, there really wasn't a culture, and it was those sort of gestures, and I guess naiveness, without the foresight, that things would become really collectible, um, that that created the culture we have today. And I really do think eventually prices, they are slowing down a bit, but I think over time they will go up. More people are going to be drawn into this. We haven't reached the peak yet, if there is a peak. Over the long term forecast, there's always going to be dedicated people like some of you watching, and like me, who you're passionate about this. This is a part of you. This is what you do. This is your interest. It's your hobby. If you you find yourself in a pinch and you have to sell off a bunch of stuff, you'll always have maybe that shoebox of games that your cousin gave you, or that you truly hunted down, the real bargains that you never let go because you value them so much. Anyways, that's this episode of Playas Guy. I just wanted to share some nostalgic memories of what retro gaming used to be and where it's at today, and take a retrospective look at that. If you have a retrospective look that you'd like to share, please make a video responding to this one, sharing your thoughts, feelings, and memories of retro gaming, or leave a comment below. Until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.